Today we're going to talk about occlusal lingual openings for endodontic therapy. The objective of this sequence is to allow you, the student, to be able to design and prepare adequate endodontic access preparations for any tooth you're assigned in the clinic. After the rubber dam is in place, the next step for endodontic therapy is to gain access into the pulp. Access is necessary in order to clean out the infected and necrotic pulp tissue, to smooth and enlarge the canals, and also to get the canal ready to receive the filling material. Now, since the pulp lives inside the tooth where you can't see it, you have to use guides in order to visualize the size, shape, and position of the pulp. We generally rely on three guides to give us this information. The three guides that we use are the simple knowledge that the pulp is always located in the center of the tooth. We use the initial radiograph to give us information on the pulp. And also we use the outline form of the crown that we're working on to give us information of the outline form of the pulp. Now let me go back and explain what we mean by these three guides. Here's some teeth sectioned in cross-section. As you can see, in each case, the pulp is about the same shape as the outline of the tooth, only it's in the exact center. You can see the pulp almost forms a bullseye right in the middle of the tooth. So here are some mandibular central incisors, sectioned mesiodistally and labiolingually. You can see that the pulp is located in the center of the tooth throughout the entire length of the tooth. Knowing the position of the pulp, namely that it's in the center of the tooth, the problem then is to visualize the overall size and shape of the pulp. To do this, at least in the mesiodistal direction view, we use the initial radiograph. Here is a radiograph of maxillary central incisor. Note that you can see in a mesiodistal view the shape and position of the pulp. You can also see the shape of the pulp chamber and pulp horns. And you can see the relative distance from the pulp horns and pulp chamber to the surface of the tooth due to secondary dentin formation. Okay, we know the position and the mesiodistal size and shape of the pulp. Now the only problem is to visualize the overall three-dimensional shape of the pulp. And the guide that we use for this is the overall shape of the crown of the tooth that we're working on. Here's a model of a maxillary central incisor with the crown shape accentuated. As you can see, it's very broad at the incisal and narrows out at the cingulum area, forming kind of a triangular shape. From this, and from the information that we get from the radiograph, we would visualize that the shape of the pulp would be triangular right in the middle of that crown surface, very similar to the shape of the crown. We've quickly gone through the three guides to pulpal morphology, namely the centralized location of the pulp, the initial radiograph, and the shape of the crown that we're working on. Now I want you to quickly try and test yourself to see if you understand these principles. Here's a radiograph of a mandibular central incisor. Study it, look at the shape and the size of the pulp. Now here are some models of mandibular central incisors. Which would you suppose would be the proper outline form for the shape of the pulp? I hope you chose the one on the right. You notice from the radiograph that the pulp was very narrow, but the crown shape tells you that it's a triangular crown shape, much as the maxillary central incisor was, only the tooth is very long in a labiolingual direction. So the outline form of the pulp will be somewhat triangular, very narrow mesiodistally, and very long labiolingually. Study the radiograph. You can see the pulp chamber and the mesiodistal size and shape of that pulp. I only briefly want to talk about the instruments necessary for access preparations, since all of the instruments used in this procedure are part of your standard endodontic tray cubicle setup. The only thing I really want to point out is the burrs used in this procedure. The burr on the left is the Kerr 1057 rounded in burr. We use this one to make our initial penetration through the enamel and establish our tentative outline form for all teeth. The next burr is the number 4 round burr. With this burr, we go directly to the pulp and use this burr to unroof the pulp chamber in all anterior and bicuspid teeth. The next burr over is the surgical length flame-shaped burr. This is used to smooth and flare the endodontic cavity preparations for anterior and bicuspid teeth. As was mentioned in lecture, this burr is not issued to you. You have to make this burr from the straight handpiece burr. So you'll take the straight handpiece burr, flame-shaped burr, you'll measure it about 8 millimeters longer than the regular length flame-shaped latched burr, cut it off with a Joe Dandy disc, and shape it to fit your contraangle slow-speed handpiece, just as was mentioned in lecture. The burr on the right is the number 6 round burr, and this is used in the molar teeth to penetrate to the pulp and unroof the pulp chamber and smooth and flare the walls of the access preparation. We're keeping these burrs to a minimum. We feel like these will meet the requirements of almost all the teeth that you'll encounter in the clinic. I'm going now to go through a step-by-step presentation of the procedure for unroofing the pulp chamber. The first example that we're going to use is the maxillary central incisor. We'll go through that in great detail, and all the other examples we'll go through rather quickly since the procedure is very much the same. In the clinic, the first thing that you would do before access preparation is to swab the tooth in the area with tincture of mercressin. Here, working on the model, we'll skip that step. The second step is once again to visualize the pulp, its position, its shape. Really get a picture in your mind of where you're going with the tooth. And don't start until you're pretty sure you have it. If it'll help you, you can outline on the tooth with a pencil what you expect your tentative outline form to be. The third step is to establish your tentative outline form in the enamel with a high-speed 1057 burr. You hold your high speed at right angles to the surface of the tooth, so the burr forms a right angle with the surface of the tooth. You penetrate through the enamel to the dentin. You extend this laterally until you've roughed out your tentative outline form in enamel. You hold the burr at right angles to the tooth surface so that it won't skip across the enamel and gouge the tooth, and also so that you can form nice right angle margins if you're going to restore this tooth in acrylic. Once you've reached the dentin, the level of the dentin, you can put your high speed aside because you're done with it. The next step is to connect the outline form that you establish with your high speed with the pulp chamber. Now in this step, you use the number 4 low-speed round burr in your low-speed handpiece. You change the angulation of the handpiece so it will cut down the long axis of the tooth. You know the pulp is going to be in the center of the tooth, so you want to cut right down the long axis of the tooth. And in one straight shot, you connect the original outline form with the pulp chamber. You'll know when you get to the pulp chamber, when you feel the burr kind of drop into the pulp chamber, as there's a reduction of cutting pressure on the burr. Now, if you have the proper angulation in this step, it's almost impossible to miss the pulp chamber. You have to keep the head of the handpiece tucked over the incisal edge of the tooth. Now, there are two ways where people get in trouble in this step. One is to start off in the wrong angulation. They keep it in the same angle that they kept the high speed, and they continue right out, miss the pulp, and go right out the front of the tooth. Now, patients don't like you drilling holes in their teeth while you're looking for the pulp, so make sure and check your angulation so that you're in the proper long axis of the tooth and go right on down. The second way you might get into trouble is if you're in the proper angulation and you get part of the way to the pulp and you get kind of nervous and you feel like you've gone too far, so there's a tendency to start to drill around in this area looking for the pulp. Now, you never want to do this, because if you find the pulp, it'll just be by accident. The only way to find the pulp is to really know where it is and go directly to it. Once again, you'll feel the burr fall into the pulp chamber as there's a sudden reduction to the drilling pressure as you enter the pulp. Now, if you really get lost and you feel like you just don't know where the pulp is or what the angulation of the tooth is, you may want to stop and take a radiograph. Now, here you can see that someone has gone the wrong direction twice. He didn't realize the angulation, the long axis of the tooth, so he stopped, took a radiograph, then he can reorient his burr to the long axis of the tooth and go directly on down. Once you feel the burr drop into the pulp chamber, stop the handpiece from running. Now that the burr is in the pulp chamber, we want to unroof the pulp chamber working from the inside out. With the burr not running, we want you to feel around the anatomy of the pulp chamber a bit, just so you'll make sure that you know where the roof is and unroof that, as opposed to gouging the walls. So you can stick the burr a little bit on farther down, feel where the walls are, run the head of the burr against the walls with the handpiece off. As you withdraw the burr from the channel that you made, you'll hit a bump as you hit the roof of the pulp chamber. When you feel that bump, you know that that's where the pulp chamber starts. You can do that in the other direction too. That's where the roof of the pulp chamber starts. When you feel that bump, you want to start the handpiece running again, apply pressure to that area of the roof, and bring the burr right on out, removing the roof of the pulp chamber, working from the inside out. Now let's return to the model. Okay, returning the burr into the pulp chamber, feeling for the wall, keeping away from the wall, recognizing where the roof of the pulp chamber starts, you slowly remove the pulp chamber, working from the inside out. Now, you won't be able to remove it in one pass, so you'll have to reinsert the burr. Feel again for the walls, keeping away from the wall of the pulp chamber, locating, in this case, the lingual roof of the pulp chamber, and once again unroofing, working from the inside out. Now you keep on doing this in and out, feeling for the roof, making sure that you keep away from the walls so you don't gouge the tooth, until you feel the burr pass from the pulp chamber to the surface without any kind of bump or click. When you feel this, you turn the handpiece off, you get your endodontic explorer, and feel the walls of your cavity preparation. Make sure that you've completely removed the roof of the pulp chamber and that you haven't gouged the walls. We've completely removed the roof. Then with the surgical length, flame-shaped burr, we enter into the pulp chamber and smooth the walls and flare the walls of our access preparation. This is a very inefficient cutting instrument, so you have lots of control to completely smooth and flare the walls. Once this is done, your preparation should be complete. All that's necessary is to check and make sure that the roof has been completely removed, that you have access, that you've not gouged the tooth, and that you fulfill all of the requirements for a properly designed access preparation. Now let me show you the steps of this procedure on an actual tooth. We'll be working on a maxillary central incisor, the same as we demonstrated with the models. As I said before, when working on an actual tooth, the first step is to swab the tooth and the surrounding area with tincture of macrescent to disinfect the operating field. Then you take a very good look at the crown of the tooth, the angulation of the tooth, and your initial radiograph, and visualize exactly where that pulp is and what your tentative outline form is going to be. Once you have that very definitely in mind, with a high-speed handpiece with a 1057 burr angled at right angles to the surface of the tooth, you establish your tentative outline form and drop down through to the dentin. You keep this slightly on the conservative side, since you can always go back and modify it, the outline form, based on the actual outline form of the pulp. As we said before, the next step is to get access to the pulp chamber. With the low-speed handpiece angled in the long axis of the tooth, visualize where the long axis of the tooth is. You start the handpiece and go directly to the pulp. You're not looking for the pulp. You should know where it is, and you go directly to it. I felt my burr fall into the pulp chamber. I knew I was there, so I stopped the handpiece. Now I feel where the roof is, where the walls are, so I know how to unroof the pulp chamber. I can feel the click, the bump of the roof, so I start my handpiece again and slowly unroof the pulp chamber. Working from the inside out, I go against the mesial, the distal, the buccal, and the lingual unroofing. I go back and check and see if I can go from the inside to the outside without feeling any roof. I feel a little bit on the lingual, so I go back and unroof. Making sure to keep away from the walls and run the burr only against the roof. I check again. It feels fairly good to me, so I put my slow-speed handpiece aside. With my endodontic explorer, I'll go down and check. Yes, I can get access into the pulp chamber. Come around. Feel smooth in all directions. I can feel fairly confident that I have removed the entire roof of the pulp chamber.
Now I want to change burrs, put in my surgical length flame-shaped burr for the final smoothing and flaring of the preparation. This goes down into the pulp chamber, and slowly along all of the walls I refine the final outline form. I smooth. It's a very slow cutting instrument, so you can smooth very easily, making sure that you can get down into the pulp chamber without gouging the tooth. When you're finished with that, then we just have to check the preparation, making sure that it's accurate and adequate and conforms to all of the requirements that we had for an adequate preparation. Then use your endodontic spoon excavator to completely clean all of the debris from your pulp chamber. Let's review some of the principles we just went through and see if you can answer some of these questions. In this case, we want to know which is the proper angulation to penetrate through the enamel. Would it be A or B? Hopefully you said A. We want to penetrate through the enamel at right angles to the surface of the tooth. This would create a good, solid restoration when we restore the tooth if we do it with acrylic, and also prevent skipping across the surface of the tooth. Now, this person's having problems trying to reach the pulp. Is his problem a improper angulation of his handpiece, or is his problem malpositioned, malaligned tooth? You should recognize that his problem was not aligning the handpiece in the long axis of the tooth. He kept his handpiece in the same angulation as when he penetrated through the enamel and missed the pulp.